folks, this is Santosh Shiva. Welcome to another episode of RunYogi Diaries. Every week, I bring you stories of people who are on a journey of well-being and fitness through endurance sports. This week, I have with me Scott Farrand, someone I think who is like old wine, getting better with age, and he's only 60 years young. Someone who's been into marathons and triathlons for over 16 years. So we get to talk about how does he do it all? How does he balance work, family, and a busy training schedule? His journey from marathons to Ironmans. What's changed with age with regards to training? What keeps him going? Let's dig in. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription means a lot to continue doing this work and growing this channel. Hit like on the video. Let us know, what did you think about this conversation? Was there something you took away from Scott's journey? Are there any other guests you'd like to see in this show? Love to hear back from you. Thank you so much. Let's dig into the conversation. Hey, Scott. Welcome to RunYogi Diaries.
Thanks, Santosh. Looking forward to a good conversation.
Absolutely. You know, I've known you professionally, and I also know that you're an active recreational athlete. Done some very cool stuff, Ironmans, marathons. And so we have a lot to talk about and learn from you. But before that, I want to kind of hand it back to you and do a quick personal introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Scott Farrand, been an age group athlete for a good number of years since I officially say the start was 2004. I live here in the Woodlands area in Texas, just north of Houston. And what a great venue and place for being active outside, because we get a lot of good weather most of the year to be able to do so. So anyway, I have a wonderful family, a beautiful wife, and two grown daughters. And so anyway, that's kind of my basic bio there. Awesome.
We have weather in Woodlands pretty good for the whole year, except for the 1 week last week, and
right.
that's historical anyway.
Right.
Terrific. So thanks a lot, Scott. So I want to start with a basic question, right? And then, so what does endurance and fitness mean to you? Like, really, what does it mean to you personally?
Oh, okay. Well, good question. The endurance is something that makes a lot of sense to me, transcending many areas, not just athleticism, by the way. And so I have that in my sort of psyche or my DNA. I kind of play the long game in the things that I'm up to, and and I guess endurance sports or athleticism is no different. And so I really enjoy the idea of getting out there and spending a good amount of time getting it done. When I was a younger man in my 20s, I used to play golf a bit, to get outdoors and see the sun and be in nature. And what I discovered over time is that gave way to preference. If I had 6 straight hours in a row, I'd much rather be riding my bike for that amount of time than swinging a golf club. And the act of being active, for a period of time like that just appeals to me. It's just kind of in my makeup. Endurance is a great thing. And it does have great, I consider them side effects. Kind of my first love is the sport and the endurance side of it. And the side effect is, good fitness results, from that. And so I kind of, came at it that way, as opposed to I'm looking for good fitness, therefore I should run or ride a bike or swim or do any of those kind of things. And I think, my boyhood had a lot to do with that. I was giving that some thought here, anticipating a conversation with you, which is, when I think back to when I was, probably 6, 7, 8 years old up through, an early teenager, 16, 17 years old, I sort of did everything on foot. I would aspire to get out of school as quickly as possible. and get outside and explore. And my friend and friends and I, did everything on our bikes. We rode our bikes here. It was a mode of transportation. And I think some of that, that kind of spills over into my adult life in the sense that that's what I learned early, and it kind of stuck with me a bit in terms of enjoying it and wanting to do that sort of thing.
Oh, that makes sense, and I like the fact that you also made a mention of it in terms of thinking long term, and I also, I guess for a lot of us in the endurance, pursuing endurance, one of the things that we learn is discipline, right? And without discipline, consistency, and I think your whole point about long term makes a lot of sense. And like you said, it all, you've been able to take it back to your life as well. And so that's fascinating. So where did you grow up? Which part of the world?
I grew up in the western suburbs in the Chicago area up in Illinois. And then when I graduated University of Illinois back in the day, I immediately moved to the Houston area, and have lived here almost ever since. I did a couple years out in Silicon Valley, and then moved back to the Houston area after I went during the internet days when it grew and grew, and then it crested and came back down. So then I came back here and started a computer company here in the Woodlands, as it turns out. And so I guess it's almost 2/3 of my life I've lived in the Houston area, and the first third up there in the Chicago area.
Nice. And I also find it very fascinating that you mentioned you started with golf and then switched to endurance. It's usually the other way around for many people, right? That's a very fascinating trajectory. So growing up, you mentioned growing up, you were running and you're walking and using bicycle for transportation. But what about sports? Were you very active while you were growing up in terms of mainstream sports?
I would say, mostly no. Although I tried every sport there was. I was in Little League. I was in the football version of Little League as a youngster. When I got into high school, I was on the 9th grade gymnastic team. And played intramural basketball. Didn't play football in high school, and so I kind of tasted all of those. And by the way, I liked them enough. I mean, it wasn't something that, well, I tried that, didn't like that, and moved on. I liked them enough, tried them out as a smorgasbord, so to speak, of different things. Not a one of them grabbed me and said, hey, this is, your life's mission in sports, to be in this area. And frankly, golf much the same way. In fact, I started golfing in high school a little bit, or learned it there, and then, post-college, my early adulthood, is when I golfed the most. And I recall being in my early work career, I golfed one round of 18 holes on the weekend, and a round of 9 holes in the summer months when it stays light till 9:30 in the Houston area, during the weekday. And with golf, it's a very precise game. You have to do it a lot to get skilled at it. And so, that grew on me for a bit, and I started to get a little bit better. I started really liking that. But, Santosh, you mentioned an interesting thing about, discipline, and I mentioned kind of playing the long game there. Those are things that are kind of a part of me. I don't know if that was a learned skill or it was a part of my DNA or what have you, but I very definitely think and act that way, in a disciplined manner, recognizing the many installments it takes to achieve something. And I'm very goal oriented. I set my goal on something, and it's usually not, tomorrow's goal. It's, multi months, maybe years, even in a journey, and drive towards those goals. So that's the kind of thing that got me involved in, endurance running. How do you grow from being a casual 5K-er to a serious half marathon or a marathoner? Same is true for triathlon. So that goal orientation, that long game, is kind of what moved me into the realms of endurance sports, which I love to this day and don't see any end in sight.
No, that absolutely. So when did you actually pivot into long distance running or endurance running? What year was that?
Well, I actually oddly remember it well. It was in the year 2004 in the Houston area here. We have something called the Renaissance Festival. If you know, you may have participated in it. And one of a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, said, "Hey, you know, I've been doing this thing and preparing for the Woodland or the Houston Chevron or whatever it was called. I don't think it was Chevron back then. Half marathon, and there's this group of us that get together Saturday mornings and test out, you know, long runs and that sort of thing. And I had been, you know, I've been I don't know what I would call it, kind of a casual runner, not even really an age group runner, if that's a tick up from casual, I don't know. And I would, you know, run in evenings, you know, in my neighborhood. The Woodlands has lots of trails you can run on. It's really nice for that sort of thing. And then on this day, on this Saturday in 2004, this friend of mine said, "Hey, why don't you throw in with us and come with us?" So I said, "Hey, you know, that makes a lot of sense because I've been thinking about going longer distances." And so that very morning, we got together at their usual place. And by the way, run by a guy by the name of Bill Dwyer. Bill Dwyer is well known in the Woodlands. I call him the father of getting people into running. He literally coaches and gets hundreds of people involved in the sport. It's his passion, it's his love. But anyway, he was running this group. I threw in with him. I went from running, you know, 5Ks in the evening and such to a 16-mile long run that first day, you know. And what's notable about that to me is then I was taking the family to the Renaissance Festival that afternoon. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to, you know, get through the walking through all of that after this long run? By the way, I don't recommend that. You shouldn't just go out and run 16 miles if you hadn't been doing that sort of thing.
Don't try this at home.
Right. Yeah, but so that kind of got me going. And then, you know, in the rest is history. I kind of never really looked back. You know, I continued to, you know, run long, not 16 miles long, but, you know, longer runs on the weekends. And I built myself up to my first big long endurance run that I would consider a race status was the Houston Marathon in 2005, that very next year. So I took about a year, you know, to build up my capabilities to do that. As you put it earlier, sort of that discipline, stick-to-itiveness, you know, and consistency. It's really about the consistency, which requires the discipline, and built myself up to be able to do that. So it was an interesting start of the journey there.
Awesome. And was running your entry? I know you do bicycling a lot as well. So did cycling come later, or was running was the entry and then you followed it with bicycling?
Well, I kind of consider running my true love when it comes to endurance sports. I had been a cycler. Let me explain. This is kind of interesting because you and I, Santosh, we did the MS 150 together one year, I think 2017.
Correct.
And you know, when I in 1986, going into the Wayback Machine, you know, I had a cousin that lived in town. He's 2 years my senior. And by the way, he was a bit of an inspiration to me. He was an endurance athlete, and he did the Woodlands Marathon before, you know, now there's a Woodlands Marathon, but back in those days, it was kind of out of the YMCA and there were like 50 people, you know, stuff like that. It was very just getting started there. Of course, it died out for many years before it got reinstated again. But anyway, so he had done that. He you know, lived in Denver, Colorado, and Austin. I consider, you know, endurance athlete towns, you know, for most of his life. And so he was here, he inspired me. So he said, hey, why don't we do this MS 150 bike ride? This is back in 86, planning for it into 87. And I said, wow, that sounds like great fun. So he kind of trained me because I had no concept of what was required to ride your bike 150 miles in 2 days. And so, he would bring me out on the weekends and we would, start out, I don't know if 20 miles was our first ride or something, and we got up to, 70, 80 miles, by the end of the training, which was before April 1987. And then in April 1987, we did it. And it was a very rewarding experience on the bike, to your point about, swimming or biking or running and those sorts of things. And that kind of got me into the idea of, riding a bike and doing it. But I really didn't pick up the bike and carry it on like I did the running in 2004. It was really in 2005 and beyond where I really picked up the bike because that's when I kind of shifted into this triathlon mode, if you will. And it was interesting because here in our own little hometown of the Woodlands where I live, the CB&I, a big company in town, sponsored this sprint distant triathlon, which was a 500-meter swim and a 15-mile bike and a 5K run. And I thought, I've been kind of wanting to broaden out and incorporate a little bit more into my repertoire than just running and, the distant bike running from 1987. And by the way, when you and I did the MS 150 again in 2017, what I tell people is, I do the MS 150 every 30 years. But anyway, so in 2004, early 2005, I thought, maybe I ought to get involved in this triathlon thing. And, I hadn't really swam appreciably. And when I was in college, there was about a 6-month period through the winter and beyond, but where a couple of my college housemates, we went and swam at the facility at the University of Illinois. And so, it was just lap swimming, not competitive, not for speed, and really not for technique, although that was a mistake. It should have been for technique. And but I had done that, way back. So here it is 20 years later. And I signed up for this triathlon. I had not swum a lick in 20 years. And so I was on business in Beijing, China, about 2 weeks before this sprint distance, small distant triathlon. I said, you know what? They got a pool downstairs. I should go give that a go. I should try to swim instead of just show up, in this triathlon and swim after 20 years of not doing it. So I donned a suit and did I did 600 meters and I can do this, right? That wasn't the end of the world. And then a week before the actual sprint distance triathlon, they had an open water swim for people to kind of acclimate if you're new to it. That was certainly me. So I went to this thing a week before in Lake Woodlands and I swam this 500 meters altogether different. Totally different. Pool swim versus open water, big different thing. It was hard. I was a little, I wouldn't say panicky, but bordering line, I was thinking, I can't touch the bottom. I can't see the bottom, And so anyway, that got me started on the journey of triathlon, of which is now my preferred race and my preferred sport because it incorporates the techniques and skills of swimming, which are exactly that. It's all about technique. It's not about strength and endurance, although that's nothing wrong with those things, but it's really about form and fluidness and streamlined behavior and stroke in the water. And then you, of course, after the swim, then you do the bike and then you do the run. And that got me started on my journey of triathlon.
Awesome. No, that's so talking about swimming, and that's one of the common, obstacles or mental blocks for most folks, who are running and bicycling is, can I handle the open water swimming? And I'm one of them. And so what did you do differently after the first, and I'm sure the first one would have been a lot of learning. So what did you learn? What did you have to do differently to make yourself a better swimmer and be at home with this open water swimming?
Yeah. Great question. And on my journey, that's exactly what I did. It was, I learned a lot to be able to, because I really didn't like swimming that much, first of all. And then second of all, when you don't swim and you don't like it, that's not the ingredients to be a good swimmer, But through consistency and discipline, I practiced it quite a bit. And I actually signed up a coach or two along my journey here to help me understand how to do it well. And that's where, I learned what a real swimming stroke is all about and how to relax in the water. And, when that first triathlon I did, I was a mono side breather, where you just turn your head to the side you're comfortable to gasp a breath of air, and I practiced bilateral swimming and the proper stroke and the proper kick associated with it by learning it. Watched a few YouTube videos, by the way, also, and in addition to getting the coaching. And then it's just really all about pool time and practice after that. Here's something, though, that's interesting about an open water swim, and specifically in a triathlon, is, in the beginning, you're all bunched up with a bunch of your favorite friends, on your left and on your right and in front of you and behind you. And when you go horizontal from vertical to start the thing, there's arms and legs flapping all over the place. And, my second triathlon, my goggles were kicked off, I had to figure out how to stay sane when that was going on. But in the coaching, what my coaches did was get 6 of us in a swim lane in a pool, and we'd all line up. And the guy on the far right and the guy on the far left, by the time they get to the 50 yards to the other side, would have to be on the opposite side. So you'd swim across each other, under and on. And the idea there was, acclimating to close proximity of other humans in the water, and not panicking or freaking out. Practiced our taking off our goggles and putting them on in the water as well, because that's a common occurrence. So all that stuff gives rise to the comfort that you kind of need to feel good about it. That plus the pool hours and the swim stroke practice, kind of got me, and from what I hear tell many others, that same process helped others become swimmers when otherwise they weren't swimmers. And so that was how it all started.
That's very, very useful, valuable advice there, and makes it definitely a lot more, encouraging for someone. I do swim. I mean, there are lots like me who swim, but never had the courage to go commit to a triathlon and, get into a race situation. So that makes me feel good, at least.
Right.
I can do it.
Yeah. Get comfortable in the water. And now, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't like it. I wasn't comfortable with it, but I have learned and overcome it. I didn't really see it as such a big hurdle, as it just kind of occurred by doing those things. And now I'm very comfortable. I actually like to do it. I like to swim now as a result of kind of sticking with it there.
Makes sense. So coming to, your journey again, so triathlon started and you went on to do the IronMan. So that was a big step up again, right? From running to learning to swim in open water, and then you committed to the IronMan. So talk to us about your first IronMan. When was that, and what prompted you to make that jump in, goals?
Well, first of all, it wasn't a sprint triathlon to Ironman in a month or two. 2005 when I did my first sprint triathlon. It wasn't until 2011, so 6 years later, that I did the Ironman. And but to your point, Santosh, I did kind of set out. Wow, wouldn't it be dreamy to take on the big race, the big distance back in the days when I was just starting out. And, I, flirted with it, and then I, set it as a goal, quote, playing the long game and such. Right. And so how I achieved it was by gradually increasing the distances in in triathlon. The low distance is typically called the sprint distance. And then there's the next distance up is typically called the Olympic distance, or the Oli, which is almost exactly a quarter of an Ironman, 25% of an Ironman. And the sprint distances are kind of weird, so that it's not a multiple necessarily of a sprint distance, but so I did a couple of Olympic distant triathlons, and they were a notable moment. Going from a sprint distant to an Olympic distant was, it's about twice as far as the sprint distances. So you're on a 25-mile bike ride and a 10K run and whatever the 1.2 kilometer swim to get to that. And then so then after a couple of years of tackling the Oli, then I moved on to some half Ironmans, which are of course half the distance of an Ironman. Yeah. By the way, an Ironman the swim is 2.4 miles of swim, and it's 112 miles of bike ride and 26.2 a full marathon at the end. And so the half Iron is a 1.2 mile swim, a 56-mile bike ride, and a 13 mile run. And so I did a couple of those, and then in advance of 2011, about 8-9 months in advance is when serious training for the Ironman began. And wow, what can I say? That is a big commitment, to your point. In my case, and in fact, as everybody I talk to, it's the same. It's to be committed to train sufficiently for an Ironman is a commitment of the whole family, basically. So the amount of time it takes to get in the miles, absolutely every Saturday or Sunday or weekend day would be a long bike being 6 or 7 hour bike ride, and many of which are 100 miles, of bike riding. And then also on the weekend, a long run, anywhere from 12 to 16, maybe 18 miles toward the end of the training. So if the run comes the day after the bike, that's a rough slog on the run. Or if the ride comes after the run, on the weekend, wow, it's hard to get super excited there, to push those pedals real hard for the day. But anyway, that was happening. And then in the weekdays, you're swimming, biking, or in my case, trainer bike riding on a weekday, because it'd be, not so easy to get out, side and ride on the outside. So in the pool water, or on a run, or on the bike trainer, during the week, and then on the weekend, a big day. And that takes out, whatever your traditions are in your family, Saturday mornings, pancakes or whatever, you have to forfeit those, because you're running or swimming and that sort of thing. And so that's a big commitment for that expansive time. Anyway, but, I went through all that, and it was, I know some people call people like me, or, people that have done an Ironman, is crazy, right? But, and possibly because we describe the journey itself and then the satisfaction of achieving as fun, so what could be fun about that? Well, hard to explain, but it's fun.
Terrific. So how was it? How was the first Ironman? That was the Houston one, right?
Yeah, well, they call it IronMan Texas. And, coincidentally, I was here in the Woodlands, super fortunate, to have all the stuff right in my backyard going on. It was quite a interesting day, for sure. It was, I got through the swim pretty well. And by the way, in Ironman, they lined up 2,200 people, and they blow off, in Lake Woodlands, they blow off the canyon, and 2,200 people go from standing up vertical to horizontal. So that swim frenzy is with you. And it lasts kind of a long time too, for that matter, with that many people, in an Ironman. But I got through the swim in under 2 hours, which is my goal. By the way, in the Ironman, there's these cutoffs. It's I think it's 2 hours and 10 minutes, for the swim. So if you're out there longer than that, they ask you to take your seat. But so I made the swim okay. I got out, did the transition, and unlike smaller distances in triathlon, the Ironman transition's kind of formal. You have a bag of clothes and you go into the tent, and there are attendants in the tent that help you. A, they give you water. B, they help you if you're trying to put on a new piece of clothing or whatever, and it's a little sticky and hard to get on, and they slather up you with sunscreen and that sort of thing. So I made that transition, hopped on the bike, and my tendency in triathlon was to move from the swim to the bike and come out a little hot on the bike, a little fast, But in Ironman, you can't, stray from your plan in order to survive the long, the endurance, the length of it all. So I was quite conscious about, going the right speed coming off the swim, so not too fast, and oftentimes when you're on the bike, you train with power. You have a GPS device on your wrist or on your bike or something that lets you know where you are and how much power you're expending. And so I was careful to stay within my power zones, so I wouldn't be all spent, because after the 112-mile bike ride, then all you have left is the marathon.
Unimaginable.
And you want to be as fresh as possible to make the run distance there, so you can't spend it all on the bike. And really, in the really long distance versions of these things, half marathon or half Ironman and Ironman, there's quite a ardent science to be able to spend appropriately your energy, so that you also have enough saved up for the end times. And boy, I got to tell you that marathon, it's not like running just a run marathon. After the swim and the bike, it's a challenge. Your times drop down definitely, or I guess get longer is the way to say that. And when I was going on the marathon, what I would do is at each of these aid stations, I would walk through the aid stations. That was my sense of rest, if you will, or both mental and physical. To have a moment where I take a quick little break and then get back on the run again, which is it served me well in both Ironmans that I've done. I've used that technique to get through the run okay, because by then you're mentally fatigued, definitely physically fatigued, to get all that done.
Yep. And you said you've done 2 Ironmans. After that you've done one more, and of course you've been running and doing long distance bicycling. From an Ironman perspective, right, given that there's such amount of energy you're burning, has your nutritional strategy changed or evolved over the years? Have you got smarter about it? Have you changed, different products, or, can you talk? Because end of the day, you're also adding calories as you're expending it, right? And if you don't get that right, I see most people struggle with it. Either they have a bad stomach or they bonk. So what have you, kind of figured out?
Well, appropriately so, Santosh. Nutrition is kind of everything, and particularly in a long distance endurance event, be it a marathon, be it an Ironman, and really a lot of these things, in my view, are what I call experiential, because you can read a lot, you can have people tell you a lot, and until you really experience them, they don't become as learned or as real. And I remember that in a couple areas, not just nutrition, but when I ran my first marathon, I was actually in line in the corral, with a bunch of other folks, and there's a gentleman next to me who's older than I, and he'd done, he's an experienced marathoner. He said, "Look, you really don't want to come out strong and hot, because you gotta just be paced, like you did in your long runs." He was presumptuous that I was smart in my long runs, and man, it took me 5 marathons to really get that. I would come out, and your bizarre set of instincts might take over. They did in my case. It's like, well, if I know I'm going to be slow at the end, so if I run strong now, then, my net overall time, using all this logic,
Yes.
and, that's true, from a science standpoint. That's not true from what your body can do. And it's also true that what happens is you spend enough in the early times that you're in deficit nutritional, hydrational, and energy. And so those last, however many miles are not just a little difficult, they're wacky difficult. And, in the marathon, they talk about hitting the wall. That's how you find the wall. You spent a little too much earlier on, the wall showed up, and then the wall, you don't just slow down a little, you slow down a lot. That makes up for any time you would have gained if you were coming out a little zippier, So I learned that the hard way here, and finally got a handle on that, so that I'm not coming out the gate, a little hotter. But nutrition is much the same. You have to understand. First of all, you can't go, a marathon distance or Ironman or even half of those without smart nutrition. And what most people find, and I do too, is that on the run, solid food is not easy to be taking in, because, you get gastrointestinal churning going on or whatever, and it just doesn't turn out well. And so now you're down to liquids and gels then, to go those distances. And you have to kind of experiment with that a bit. Again, in my earlier, more naive or less experiential days, I would say, well, when I get hungry, I'll have a gel, or when I feel like I'm, depleting or getting too tired or whatever the case may be. And really, it's a little too late then. You need to be taking nutrition in, during the whole time, and not reaching to a point where you get depleted, because then you can't replenish it during the event, during the exertions, And so those things are all a little bit, I talk to other people that are in, do this kind of thing, everybody has a little bit different, a preference in what they take, be it carbohydrates in their hydration waters of sorts, or whether they slant towards gels, or, there's these other, like cube hard gel things you can get, I don't know what they're called exactly in name, but and you got to find out what works for you that you can tolerate. And most importantly, you got to figure out when is the strategic and the right times to take them during the expanse of the time that you're out there. And, what I would say, my advisements would be to anybody that would take advice from me is a regular duty cycle, taking them, even when you feel like you don't need them, but by taking them, not in abundance, but in sufficiency, is the right path to get through the whole race or a whole endurance event without hitting the wall or getting too depleted such that you're just not any good. I mean, bonking is a very real thing. I've experienced that many times in long runs in my early running days, where, man, you just didn't have enough in you. And once it's gone to a particular level, then, you're not good for much of nothing.
Totally. So in your personal approach, has it, so, when you time your intake during these races, I'm talking about the races specifically, especially the long ones like Ironman, are you doing it by miles, or are you doing it by hours? So like once in 1 hour, or are you doing like, hey, I'm going to do it by, if I'm on bicycle, once in every 5 miles, I put in a gel. And is there some formula you've come up with?
Well, there is, and by the way, if you're riding and running consistently, like in a triathlon or something, time in miles are much the same kind of measurement, right? Because you're going at a pace, and therefore a certain amount of time is a certain amount of miles. So I kind of consider those the same measurement. But another measurement is I look at when during the particular thing, like, for example, when you're coming off the bike in a triathlon, like in the last, if it's a longer race, like a half or more Ironman, about 2 miles out when you're done with the bike, you kind of want to load up on both hydration and nutrition. And so, but prior to that, it would be a more consistent thing. I would sip the hydration with the carbohydrates in it, throughout. If they're in an Ironman at mile 60 on the bike, there's a long special needs, they call it, stop. I say long, you shouldn't spend a lot of time, doiting around there, but there's a bag with your special things that you put in there, so people tend to take a moment and drink something special or eat a half a peanut butter sandwich or whatever, and then carry on. But outside of those really long distances, just pacing yourself at a fairly regular cycle, and then at strategic times, taking more. They also say, and I found this to be true, although I don't have this home to the science like I do the bike to run transition, but when you transition out of the water, you're supposed to be upright for a period of time, maybe 15 minutes before you drink a lot. Mm-hmm. I find myself, particularly after 2 hours in the water on an Ironman swim, coming out of there going, hey, I'm kind of thirsty, so I'd, take a good few gulps of water and or sports drink, at the time. But they say you should acclimate a little bit better before you take it all on. But I think, really the thing to be very conscious about in all of these things is the total calorie count that you take on. There's all these scientific formulas about how much you'll spend during what activity that are true. And, you burn, 4,000 calories on the 112 mile bike ride, which is a lot of calories to burn, but you're not to take in 4,000 calories and fill your cup back up to what you just spent. It's quite a bit south of that, maybe even half of that. To replenish, not replace, is sort of the mantra for as you're going, because you're going to spend more than you're going to replace, these long, maybe at a marathon or, half marathon or even the triathlon versions of all that stuff. So that's how to think about the nutrition. And that's worked for me pretty nicely.
Yep. Makes sense. I was reading this book called Endure by a guy by the name, I think the author is Matt Fitzgerald. And there's one thing that I learned from that book, which was kind of an eye-opener for me, which was, the way the calories are being utilized in these endurance events. It's not about replenishing every calorie that's being used by your muscles and replenishing your glycogen, but it was more about keeping your liver full of glycogen so that your brain doesn't bonk. Mm-hmm. So whatever calories that you're consuming is topping off your glycogen stores in the liver, which is feeding glucose to your brain. And if your brain shuts down, that's it. But your muscles are not going to get all the calories from this intake that, one tends to take. And that was like that made sense, because I would always kind of play around with this. How is it possible to, give yourself all the calories you burn in those long events, because the body has more of it, so may as well use it. So that was a very interesting eye opener for me from this book. Mm-hmm. And you've been, a busy executive, right? You traveled a lot during your working years. And so how did you balance travel, especially travel, and you travel abroad quite a bit, and all this training and family and other commitments? How did you kind of figure out, first of all, travel? How did you manage training while travel, especially the running and all that?
Yeah, well, first of all, with travel, I think you have to adopt this. I've heard this said many times. I've practiced it, and it worked okay for me. But this idea of don't expect to have the same, training when you travel as you do when you're not traveling. Of course, I guess maybe that's a little super obvious or something. But and so, well, then what should you expect, and that sort of thing. And a lot of times when I would travel, first of all, I would search for accommodations that had a pool. And in hotels these days, sometimes like these postage stamp size pools that aren't useful to actually do a swim in. So look for a pool 25 yards or more. But But, and that'd be a convenient thing in a hotel to, just jump into a pool and good to go. The other thing is, learning where you can maybe run. And, I have like we all do on our smartphone apps, these things like Map My Run or whatever, version of those kind of things you prefer or choose. And, chart a little course and ask at the front desk at the hotel, if it's a good one or not. And, or where's a good place to run. And, they're always quite helpful, concierge or just the regular guy or gal at the counter. And I wouldn't stop cold, but I would stop the super long distances. But even just doing a little bit of that kind of thing, maybe it'd be, a 30-minute run instead of an hour or hour and a half, version of a run, or getting a few strokes in the pool and practicing the stroke, because that's what you do when you swim. You practice the stroke mostly. Find a pool to get into and practice the stroke, and then, realize that you're not going to get quite the same quality out of it as you might get otherwise. And then you also have to be, as you mentioned too, you be somewhat aware of your travel plan, because you want to be careful about what you do before you get on a long flight or halfway across the world or whatever, or even just across the country flight in the USA. You want to make sure you're eating carefully and you're not overexerted and get the effect of a flight against your training. So you have to kind of keep all that in mind. I think all that's somewhat tolerable if your travel is modest. If you're on the road all the time, I don't have that experience, and B, I think that would be hard to train for a big event if you're on the road all the time. I think in my world, Santosh, the way that I managed, having a family and a demanding job and demanding training and all that, it's really about the cooperation of the family when it comes on down to it. So, say what you will, whoever you are, endurance athlete, they're gonna notice, and because it's going to be true that you're going to be gone some or not home with the family when you're training, like I said, these 6-hour, 7-hour bike rides once a weekend and a couple-hour run, on the weekend, and the prep before, the shower after, all steal some time. So, my girls, my wife, they've been very, very supportive, and I couldn't do things like this without their condoning and support of it. And particularly, in leading up to a big event like an Ironman, because that's a long haul, the training leading up to that. So, my wife and kids have been awesome and supportive of that. So that's the main thing. And then, as I've told many, including my wife, when you're super busy, you spend most of your think time about what's next, more on what's not next than what's next. We all have things we should not to do, and in some cases must do, but you have to triage what you're not going to do, And so that's best done against a priority, by the way, right? Because there's stuff that's more to do than you have time to do in a 24-hour day and a 7-day week. So you're going to have to pick what you're not going to do carefully and do the priority things correctly. Family, your spiritual needs, your God, your training, your work, and put all those things in alignment and have that pretty firmly fixed in your behavior, so that nothing that's important to you drops onto the sideline or suffers dramatic from it. What I think when I was training for Ironman, what suffered most was my sleep, because by the time you get a full day of work, and I would be 7:30 at night, I'd get off of work, and then I would start training, whatever that was. I'd go to the pool on the way home, or I'd go home and get on the run path, ultimately with my little light on my head. The trail was dark. It was in the winter months, and If I biked, during the week, it would be, on the trainer as opposed to outside. And then, and so I'd finish that up, get a shower, and my nice wife would have my late plate ready at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night to eat that meal. And then the alarm would go off by, 5:20 the next morning for me to get up and go at it again here. So that's, if you choose to take on a serious endurance event, some version of that would probably be in your story also.
So, by the way, happy birthday! You just turned 60.
Yes, sir.
And I think you proved that age is just a number. With you're active, you're really taking it to another level with every year going by. So in terms of training, as you get 50, 60s, what is changing for you? What new techniques are you adopting?
Well, let me just first say I notice it plenty. By the way, it does change, and that specifically kind of one of the things that I do and need to do is take very seriously the recovery periods. When I was a young man doing endurance sports, the back-to-back days, in some cases even 2-a-days, a swim and a run or a bike and a swim or whatever, were possible, and I suppose they're possible now, properly done, but making sure I get the right amount of recovery between sessions is super key. And I remember people telling me before I had the experiential version of it, I really experienced it, and they'd say, you get injured or something if you're in, it's not like a piece of shrapnel comes through your body. That's not what's meant. You might get injured, but it's a soft tissue muscle injury can happen if your muscle isn't, properly recovered and it's overtaxed again. Stress fractures, which I thankfully have never had a stress fracture before, but I've had overtaxed muscular problems, something called mad calf disease. It's a little bit of a play on words, but it's where, a leg muscle, in my case, a calf, under multiple long runs, too much back to back, and that calf would seize up, and it wasn't just a moment. It was, wow, it took me out for 3 months for it to properly recover. And that's due to not proper amount of recovery in between. And by the way, that's happened to me twice. And so, now it's very clear, I don't want to be in that situation where I've overtaxed and then I'm out for 3 months. I want to make sure I'm properly recovered between, and therefore can consistently, be on my path, so to speak, which we spoke the importance of consistency. But so that's one thing, and that's first and foremost is the proper recovery here. And the second thing I'd put in the list that I noticed too is that you hear in running circles stuff, hey, you need to really exercise your core while you're doing these things. And back in the day, in my we mentioned 2004, I kind of started out with regularity in my endurance sports and stuff. Well, I didn't think about the core whatsoever. Back in the day, I'd say my first half of endurance time, I've been an age group athlete as an endurance person, but now in the second half and more, I think about the appropriate strength training in addition to the endurance training. So you have to pay a little more attention to that stuff, your core. That's sort of a pithy, short thing to say, your core, but very specific muscle groups within your body that need exercisement that are otherwise in use while you're doing endurance sports, but they're not getting specifically exercised for strength purposes, so they can store glycogen, they can be good assists. So those two things, recovery and strength training, I think are most notable to introduce into or, regularly do, as you age in athleticism. It's kind of interesting. You mentioned, my 60th birthday, I just spent over, but it's been a curiosity to me about when does it end, kind of a thing. And my goal and hope is it's not in sight for me, it's many, many, many more years. And I have a good friend of mine that's, that's 12 years my senior. So I put him at about 72, and he's going at it strong. He's a runner. He's a triathlete kind of guy, So I look at him and say, wow, and by the way, I think that about many things about, some of these things aren't exact science, and I have a science and engineering background. I like that surety, that black and white, that exact science. But there's lots of little things in your head and things in your body and things you do, that all kind of come together to make the orchestra of an endurance athlete. And that's also a key point here is your mindset. And there's another lady that I aspire to be as awesome as she is. She's 84 years old. She still does sprint triathlons at 84. And, has been through all kinds of things in her life, because 84 years, you see a lot of things. And she's had various injuries along the way, even endurance sports related injuries. And she, overcame those and keeps on going. So those are great role models when I think about aging and think about behaving smartly, because it isn't the same as when you're, substantially younger. That makes for a long, playing the long game, if you will, right?
No, totally makes sense. I think recovery and strength, those are, and I guess mobility would,
yes.
I would also add mobility and flexibility to it.
Right.
Make a lot of sense. Recovery is very important. In fact, I had one guest on my show, Dwayne. He's 80. He turned 80, and he's a triathlete and he's a coach. And so I completely agree with you. This is for the long run. You got to look at it from a long haul perspective. So what's next? Anything you're training this year for next year?
Well, it's I would say yes. I had signed up for my third Ironman, the Ironman Arizona, and of course, by the way, if you're in North America, you like the Florida Ironman, the Arizona Ironman, and the Texas Ironman, particularly in Texas now that it's moved up to April versus May, so it's a little cooler. But you like those because they're a little more flat than some of the other Ironman courses are, very, very hilly and such. But I had signed up for Ironman Arizona last year, and I was a little worried about it because the pandemic had interfered with a lot of. It's not so much that you couldn't train, it's that you couldn't practice racing in race venues, during the pandemic. And so, Ironman saw fit to, and they were canceling races one right after another. But Arizona was hanging tight, but eventually they passed on it and pushed it out here. So I hope to get that done here. I don't know if it'll be this next November, but by the next November after that is my real target for that I able to get back out there, train vigorously for it and go for that. And in the meantime, I'll be doing running races and smaller distance triathlons, leading all up to that. And because I find, Santosh, and I'm sure many people would have the same view, but, there's nothing like being committed to a race to be motivation and inspiration to get out there and get it done. Because when there's not I need to perform during this or survive in some cases, in this next race, there's nothing like that to kind of get you out there when you're kind of you're not feeling it, you're, I could watch that TV program that I was thinking I wanted to watch, or I could go out for my run. What's it going to be, And when that race is out there lurking, that draws me out there, to get it done. And so I'll anytime, certainly before a long event like an Ironman, I like to do these intermediate races to be both inspiration and a good preparation for that.
Yeah, totally agree. I agree that without a race, that 1 hour more of sleep that every Saturday morning is what gets more important.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Totally agree. Hey, that's terrific, and loved the conversation. There was a lot of learning in your from your experience. I want to move to the last part of our conversation, which is the rapid fire round, and I have some questions that I have pulled up here, which related to your fitness and triathlons, and we'll see just for fun, right?
Sure. I'm curious what you're going to ask. Go for it.
All right. So this was the question I asked before, so I'm going to just kind of modify it. So what's your favorite city to run outside Houston?
Well, I would say Chicago. I did the Chicago Marathon up there, and boy, I got to tell you, the spectators are spirited. By the way, when you run through the city, the street venues are kind of thin compared to the open roads in some of the areas you run in Houston and others. And so between the fans cheering on and their close proximity and usually good weather, you can have inclement weather up in the Chicago Marathon, but that's a great place to run.
All right. And it's your hometown. I mean, that's where you grew up. So,
Mm-hmm.
So what's your favorite food guilty pleasure after a hard day's workout?
What is my guilty pleasure? Well, we didn't talk specifically a lot about my my nutritional habits, not on the course, right? And one of the things I'll say is, I've kind of sworn off sugars a good deal. I don't really aspire to the big dessert, that back in my young days, that was always the thing to look forward to after a big meal, is a big dessert, and so I aspire to fruits, basically, when it comes on down to it. So complex carbohydrates that aren't are accretive, as opposed to stealing from your conditioning and your health. So if I were going on a big run, mid that day or something, I would get out a big tranche of cantaloupe with some strawberries and raspberries on top of it and go to town.
All right.
By the way, pizza is my other big fave, right?
Yeah.
So,
that qualifies as a guilty pleasure. Fruits are not guilty pleasure. That's very healthy. So right? we'll go with pizza then. So I don't know if you had done a math, but do you know how many calories you burn in an Ironman average?
Well, I don't. In my case, that'd be an average of two Ironman, but on the order of about 10,000 calories. It's a serious amount. On the Ironman course, I'm out there for 15 hours in motion the whole time. That's a lot of calories to burn up there. I can't replenish all those, but I burn that.
Yeah, you're right about that. 10,000 calories is what I also got as an answer. This is a triathlon trivia.
Mm-hmm.
When was the first official triathlon? The word triathlon was used for a race. Which year was it? And if you remember, if you know the city.
Yeah, I believe the first Ironman triathlon was 1978 in Hawaii. I don't actually recall which island and city. It wasn't where Kona is, I don't think. It's but a city. What's the answer?
Okay, the answer that I got was it was 1974 in San Diego.
Okay, well, there you go. All right. Here's the story I hear tell a lot about that. I don't know how much is lore or fact or whatever, but is there was a group of guys in Hawaii, and there's swimmers and bikers and runners, and they all thought their sport was the killerest sport. And that what they did in devising the idea of an Ironman was try to prove which sport was the most grueling, and that if it was swimming, then the swimmers would win, because during the swim it was long enough that they would shine amongst the folks that weren't swimmers, and if it was the bike, then so that was the various notion early in the 70s there, right, that it came about. That might be, since the 1974 in San Diego, I don't know, but that was one of the stories that gets told a lot about Ironman.
There's no the Ironman, this triathlon. So Ironman maybe
I
78.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was speaking specifically to
Ironman. Okay,
Ironman.
that may be, you may be right. I had a guest in my show who's an Ultraman, and that's double of Ironman.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
That's double of Ironman. Like,
yeah.
Where does it end, right?
Yeah. Really. Gosh, yeah. Yeah.
And the last question I have is: I know you train different times of the day, but which is your favorite time to train, if you were given a choice?
My favorite time to train is in the late afternoon, not dusk, but late afternoon, going towards dusk. By the way, I like to train anytime I can. is sort of the cliche answer there, but that's when, I don't know, I can't quite tell what it is about that. My physical makeup, if that's when I'm feeling the best, or whatever the case may be. I like that. Man, I have trained many hours in the dark of night, and in fact, I've even gone out on training runs at 9 o'clock at night, starting out, at that time before. Of course, we've all their endurance sports have gone early mornings, from 4 a.m. to 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, so, but late afternoon, that's mine.
Yeah, I would have given the same answer. My favorite time is also late afternoon. I've never been an early morning guy. I mean, you do it because that's a constraint, heat, whatever, but late afternoon is the best time. I even for me, I would agree with you on that one. All right. Hey, that was a fantastic conversations. I enjoyed it. We're going to kind of wrap up here. And so anything you want to say as a final wrap-up comment?
I would say this, is that, look, my endurance, my age group endurance, I don't know if you call it a career, but time in life, has been inspired by many people. And that's why I'm in it. I've seen other people do it. I said, wow, that's really cool and interesting. I want to do stuff like that. And then, not only has it been the inspiration for the impetus to get, to go over the threshold to do it, but then when doing it, other people who I admire, or view as great in that, I learn from them. I ask them questions and such. And so, and there's been many people in my life like that, since 2004, of course, so some notables come to mind as some of these older people I've spoken to, and particularly in my days now, I'm looking towards them to how did they manage it? What's in store for me next? I've had some great coaches, and specifically one coach, Kimberly McNamee, has been a great inspiration. In fact, in my early days of triathlon and middle days and current days, she's been my coach, and I've had a few others along the journey. She stands out head and shoulders by being a player coach. She's an Olympic time trial runner in the marathon. She's been professional triathlete and been to Kona multiple times, and has been, when she gives me coaching advice, it's coming out of a sense of depth and experience, of which I think is super critical and important in endurance sports, is the experience around it. So she's speaking very credibly and that stuff, and giving me, good ideas and the right things to do, and that sort of thing. So the short version of your answer there, Santosh, it's engage other people, if you're an athlete and a endurance person, because you'll learn a lot from them. And I hope, by the way, thanks for having me on the show. And hopefully there's a little bit of learnings, going on, even in people viewing your show with us speaking, and the many other guests you've had. So that's my last comment.
Thank you. Scott, thank you so much for taking the time out. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and we'll stay in touch.
You bet. Same, Santosh. Thanks for having me on your show, and always great to be with you, talk with you about any subject, this one inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.